Chevy LS engines has been around for more than 25 years, and there's still a lot of disagreement about exactly how do the thermostats work on an LS engine. So we thought we'd dig into that a little bit. We actually cut a water pump apart to see how the thermostat actually works. And then also we thought we'd share a little information about the different generations of thermostats in LS engines. So if you're familiar with old school small block and big block engines, you know the thermostat was always up on top, up on the intake manifold, because the coolant would be pumped by the water pump through the block, up into the cylinder heads, then in through the passages in the intake manifold, come in contact with the thermostat. Thermostat opens, coolant goes then out the upper radiator hose into the radiator, gets cool, lower hose comes back into the water pump, and it starts all over again. Well, that's not the way the LS works, obviously, because the thermostat is down here low on the engine. It's actually attached to the lower hose of the radiator. So how in the world does the thermostat get a signal that says, hey, it's time to let some coolant from the radiator into the engine because our engine temperature is high enough, we need some coolant? Well, let's take a look at how the coolant actually circulates in an LS engine. So we have two ports here. Both of these are actually attached to the block. This passageway circulates inside the water pump, comes out here, goes into the block around the cylinders. Then there's some passages that go up through the head gasket into the cylinder head. So then the coolant circulates around through the cylinder head, picking up that heat from the combustion chamber. It comes back down, and there's a passageway that comes from the head back into the block, and this then is the return. So it goes out into the engine, comes back into the water pump. So what else is going on? Well, this passageway is attached to a passageway here that, under normal circumstances, has a heater hose outlet right here. This would go out to a heater or to a valve and then return back into the engine. So if there's coolant circulating from here to the heater and back again, then there's a chance that this thermostat is going to get some warm coolant, and eventually it opens and starts to let coolant come in from the radiator. But one of the questions is, well, do I have to have a loop here? Do I have to have this going out to a heater? Can I just block both of those off? And some people say yes, and some people say no, and here's what I think is happening. The coolant actually comes down here, and if you have this capped off, it can still come in contact with the thermostat because there's an opening in the bottom of most thermostats, or at least there's this little indentation that lets a certain amount of coolant circulate through this passageway here, past this second valve, if we'll call it. A little bit comes through and comes in contact with the thermostat. The thermostat can then open and let coolant come in from the radiator. So the answer is, yeah, it's better if you have a loop or a heater for the coolant to fully circulate, but it will go past this little disc here, if you will, and actually come in contact with the part of the thermostat that makes it open. We were curious about, well, this thing can move, so does it move when it's actually in operation? And we checked that. We put it in a pan of boiling water to see what would happen. This part moves, this part does not move. This spring is there only to keep that in contact with this opening and restrict the flow, but it doesn't completely eliminate flow. So that's a little bit about how the thermostat actually works and how the coolant circulates in an LS engine. Now, as far as the thermostats themselves, the first generation, which came out in '97 with LS1 Corvettes, '98 in F-body Camaros, and '99 in Silverado trucks. The thermostat housing and the thermostat were sort of integrated. You can take this apart, but they weren't serviced that way. If you wanted to replace the thermostat, you replaced the whole thing, the housing and the thermostat. Well, that then became obsolete, and Chevrolet switched to, well, this style of thermostat, which can, this is an aftermarket housing, but you get the idea that this is separate from the housings. You didn't have to replace the housing, you just replaced the thermostat. And so it seals in place in the housing, and here's our disc that closes this off, sort of. Now, there are actually, we'll call it 3 generations. This would be the first generation. This could be the second generation. The third generation is still made like this, except the bolt pattern changed slightly wider, and the diameter of this part of the thermostat changed a little bit. So I have to have a cheat sheet to tell you how that happened. So naturally, it didn't change at the same time. So trucks, for example, switched over to what we'll call the third generation, the one with the wider bolt pattern. They switched in 07. So all Silverado 5.3, 4.8, 6.0s from 07 through 13 will have this third generation bolt pattern. The Corvettes, though, did not switch to this until 09. So 09 through 13 Corvettes have this. And then, of course, Camaros took a hiatus for a while and then came back into production in 2010. So the 2010s through 2015s would have this third generation bolt pattern. And GTOs, the 04 to 06 and the G8 Pontiacs from 08 to 09, both use what I'll call the second generation, the narrower bolt pattern, but the separate housing and thermostat. So I hope that helps a little bit clear up some of the confusion about how LS thermostats work. Part of the reason why we got involved in this is that we wanted to have a way to control electric fans, and we wanted to make sure that we were putting a heat-sensitive switch somewhere in a system where it was going to get some coolant at the temperature we wanted to get it. And so we needed to know how the thermostat worked, and that's why we've gone to this trouble. So I hope that helps you.